Welcome to episode 8 of WooWoo for the Skeptic. I am your host, Kim Polinder. This week's show is all about pet rocks, so to speak. Crystals are everywhere these days, even in airport shops. Is there something truly special about them, or is it all in people's minds? I'll be talking with a woman who says crystals not only hold special energy, but they can also help with physical healing in the body. Stay tuned to hear more. Gemstones have been used in jewelry for thousands of years, but what should we make of the claims that certain stones hold energetic properties that can affect our emotional and physical bodies? Because there is no money in research for metaphysical concepts, there aren't many large-scale studies to reference. I found the work of Dr. Marcel Vogel intriguing, which I'll go more into after the interview. I myself have experimented a lot with crystals in my own life. When I first started buying them, I was drawn to things like tiger's eye and black tourmaline, which I then placed on my nightstand. One of the first things I noticed was that I no longer had nightmares. Not that I was having them frequently or anything, but I did notice that the last bad dreams that I had suddenly ended up with me conquering the enemy or succeeding in some way. Whereas before, I would either die in the dream or be incapacitated somehow. I then started placing crystals around me when I meditated, sometimes even directly on my body, and it was interesting to experience different physical sensations with crystals directly on the body. I now have dozens of crystals around my house and typically wear gemstone bracelets of some sort. Are the crystals really doing anything, or is it a placebo effect? I find that I don't really care about how they're improving my life, whether it's through the power of my mind or if my body truly is attuning to some sort of vibration in them. The bottom line is they make me feel good, so I do it. But to get a more scholarly approach to crystals, please enjoy my conversation with Ashley Leavy. Today, I am so excited to be talking with Ashley Leavy. In 2007, Ashley got her first taste of crystal healing workshops, and in 2010, she began training students in crystal healing. Ashley is now the founder and educational director of the Love and Light School of Crystal Therapy, which offers online training and certifications. Ashley, thank you so much for being on the show and welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me, Kim. I'm really excited to be speaking with you today.
All right, so why don't you first give the listener a little bit of info on your background and how you took an interest in crystals?
Sure. So for me, it really started in my childhood. I was lucky enough to get to spend a great deal of time with my grandparents when I was growing up, and my grandfather was an avid collector of minerals, and he was a very scientific-minded person. He was actually a chemical engineer for many, many years, most of his career, and he really appreciated the beauty in nature. And we would spend a great deal of time together, and he'd show me his mineral collection and tell me all about the crystals, and we'd also go take little nature walks, and he would help me identify native plants to the area. And we did this really cool thing together where we'd track the migration of geese at this pond by his house year over year. And we did a lot of really special things together. And I just look back on that time with such joy in my heart. And I just remember always being so fascinated by the crystals, because here were these beautiful things that you could touch and hold. And, unlike a flower, which if you picked it and it was so beautiful and you wanted to really hold it and enjoy it, obviously it would wither away. But these crystals were kind of this like permanent, lasting form of beauty that came from the earth. And I just remember being so enamored with them. And I started learning everything that I could about crystals. And when I was in third grade, my grandpa gave me the Smithsonian Guide to Crystals and Minerals for Christmas. And I remember poring over that book and just reading everything I could. And I know that sounds like dry reading for a 10-year-old kid, but I loved it. I loved reading about, mining and earth science and all these things. But the thing that really stood out to me when I was reading that book were the historical legends about crystals and how they'd been used by ancient peoples all the way up through kind of modern day. And I loved that aspect of it. And that really piqued my curiosity. So I kind of started to explore that a little bit more because I'd never realized that these could be more than something that was just collected or used for an industrial purpose. And my very first book about the metaphysical properties of crystals was Melody's Love is in the Earth, a kaleidoscope of crystals. And that's kind of known as one of the main resources for crystal therapists out there. And that just opened up a whole new world for me. So from there, I just went on to do a lot of self-study. And then as you mentioned, in 2007, I took my first professional crystal healing training. And it really just opened up a whole new world for me. And I realized that there was a connection there for me and something that I needed to explore.
Well, that sounds so special, the connection you had with your grandfather. And I love that you were such a crystal nerd at such a young age.
I certainly was.
I'd love to start off talking about the history of the crystals because I myself don't know that much about the history or how long ago it's been studied or who discovered the energy in them.
You know, it's kind of a hotly debated topic. Some sources say as long ago as 25,000 BC, humans were using crystals for their so-called medicinal value. We say medicinal value because at the time, everything was thought to be just medicine. And it was good for healing or luck and good health as generally what people were using these stones for, we think. But they were very revered. You can tell that, you know, there are some archaeological sites where human remains have been found, particularly very revered members of tribal societies who were thought to be like medicine men or shaman who were found buried with these very powerful crystal amulets.
Oh, wow.
I remember reading one source that was really interesting because there was a particular discovery in an archaeological dig site, I want to say it was in Siberia, where there were actually some quartz crystals found in a little pouch that also contained some healing herbs along with this medicine man or shaman. And so it's thought that, you know, when we kind of look at, okay, there are these very sacred healing herbs in the same pouch as these crystals that were buried with this prominent figure in the society, we can kind of jump to some, hopefully, a well-founded conclusions that these were thought to be healing tools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the fact that it was used so long ago kind of establishes the pattern that, hey, this isn't something that someone came up with in the 80s, you know?
Exactly. And then, you know, in terms of kind of written source works, the Egyptian Book of the Dead is the oldest written confirmation of crystal therapy in the world. So in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, you can actually find reference to different stones that were used to help the deceased cross over into the afterlife. There are also references to stones used for particular ailments like disorders of the blood. The Egyptian Book of the Dead recommends strongly that hematite is used to bring balance and healing to blood disorders. So you can find these little things kind of sprinkled throughout these historical resources. And then even after that, I think one of the oldest known works about crystals comes from Theophrastus. And it's just called On Stones, Theophrastus on Stones. And that's a written work all about the healing qualities of crystals. And from there, you have more prominent figures like Hildegard von Bingen that were very, you know, strongly influenced by all things in the natural world, but in particular minerals.
I wonder just how they associated certain crystals with certain energies and healing. Do you think it was maybe a matter of someone who was intuitive and then just tested it out?
You know, we don't really know where some of these properties came from, but other stones have particular legends associated with them where you can kind of see where some of these properties came from. A good example is amethyst. So amethyst in modern day, for most crystal healers, one of its associated properties is that it helps with addictions. And that can actually be linked back to its connection to a legend that's found in both Greek and Roman culture, but where, depending on which you look at, either Bacchus or Dionysus, the god of wine, was consumed with lust and was running after a young goddess, a young maiden, I should say, named Amethyst. And he was chasing after her, filled with lust, lost because he was very, very drunk on wine. And when he finally caught up with her, another one of the goddesses stepped in and turned the young maiden to a clear, beautiful crystal. And he was awestruck with the beauty of this crystal, and he felt so bad for chasing her with this lustful energy that as atonement he actually poured a cup of his wine over the stone, turning it to purple. And that's why we know the deep purple quartz crystal is amethyst now. And so because of its connection with wine and lust and a little bit of excess, it's now known as a stone to help with easing addiction. So there are kind of some of these historical legends that have filtered down through the ages. But some of the stones, I think it very much could be just an intuitive connection that someone had along the way. And it's something I get asked a lot about with modern crystal healing books. If I go and I read this author, they list, maybe these 10 or 12 properties for this particular crystal. But if I go read about that stone in another book, there are completely different properties listed. And I think that's just based on the author's experience with the stones personally, or their work with clients, or intuitive guidance that they've received along with those historical sources. And they all get compiled kind of together.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that there was different uses depending on which healer is using them.
Yeah, and that's one of the main difficulties actually with crystal healing, is that it's such a subjective thing because it's working with subtle energy. It's not necessarily working with something physical. It's not a symptom-based approach to treatment. So it can be actually very difficult for people who are skeptical to understand, well, how are they really working when you have all these people reporting different experiences? And what most crystal healers believe is that's because that individual stone has a very unique vibrational frequency, so it will work with different people in different ways. Mm-hmm. And so there's really no right or wrong when it comes to crystal healing. It's just about that subjective kind of personal experience.
Okay, well, that really explains it much better. Now, in one of your videos, I noticed you talking about sacred geometry and just kind of the energy in crystals at a physical level. Can you talk a little bit more about that, about why they hold special energy?
Yeah, so the way that most people believe that crystal energy works for healing is that crystals, all crystals, have a precise molecular arrangement. They have a special internal geometric structure that's based on the shape of their unit cell, which is like the very smallest building block of that crystal. And so the way that the molecules and atoms stack within a stone, according to the angles of their molecular bonds, actually cause this precise crystalline blueprint to form within the crystal. Mm-hmm. And this blueprint has a very perfect, stable structure to it. So when you take that perfect, stable energy of the crystal and you bring it into the human energy field, which is constantly in flux, the human energy field starts to go through the process of entrainment and actually mimic or match that stable vibration of the crystal. So if you think about how a quartz crystal is used in a watch to help keep time, it's because it has this regular pulse of energy. So you can see the physical effect of that in something like a watch. Well, imagine if you bring that into your own energy body and it levels out and balances that energetic frequency into something that's more of a balanced vibration. That's how most crystal therapists think that crystals work.
Oh, that's so interesting. So let's talk a little bit about the different types of crystals and some of their uses.
There are so many, and you can find these grouped in lots of different ways, and you can find commonalities between the crystals. So one way that a lot of people tend to group the crystals is actually by their crystal system, which is a geologic way of kind of looking at crystals according to their internal symmetry. So there are 7 different crystal systems, from hexagonal to trigonal to orthorhombic, monoclinic. There are these 7 crystal systems based on their symmetry. And so crystals within one system will usually share common traits. For example, crystals in the hexagonal system are very powerful amplifiers of energy. And that's a common trait that those crystals have. But there are also different ways to group the crystals. For example, like all the minerals that are in the quartz group. So you have clear quartz, smoky quartz, amethyst, rose quartz, citrine. These are actually all different varieties of quartz minerals, and sometimes we we give these different varieties different names depending on their color or their inclusions and things like that. So, in terms of the way that influences the energy and the properties can vary a great deal. So something like a regular clear quartz is usually thought of as kind of a master crystal. Quartz is the most abundant mineral on Earth. And so it's a natural amplifier of energy. It's used to balance and align the chakra centers. But then when you have a specific variety of quartz, like I mentioned amethyst before, it has a deep purple color to it because of the inclusion of some iron atoms within the quartz matrix itself. So that amethyst, because of that intense purple color, is usually based on that color energy and the way that the light reflects and refracts among its internal surfaces so that we interpret that color as purple, is usually associated with the crown chakra, which is kind of at the top of the head, and it's an energetic area of the body associated with things like a meditation and higher level spiritual work and connection to divine energy and universal source energy. So a lot of crystals do get their properties based on these different color frequencies or their crystal systems or just that personal connection. Do you have a favorite stone, Kim, that you'd like to know a little bit about the properties of?
Well, recently I went on a rock digging excursion.
Fun.
This company that allows you to come in to their dig site and sift through stones, and you can take home whatever stones you find. And so this particular site had a lot of tourmaline. So there was a lot of pink tourmaline, which I hadn't seen a lot of.
That's one of my favorites.
Yeah, pink and green tourmaline. So I have all of these pieces now spread around my house. I have over 100 crystals in my house, but I really like the tourmaline. It's probably maybe heart energy.
Yeah, you are a person after my own heart. Tourmaline is actually my favorite type of crystal. And like you mentioned, the black tourmaline is so good for protection, but it's also a really good grounding stone. So it helps keep you kind of centered and connected to present moment consciousness, which is important for a lot of people because we can so easily get distracted by things that are happening around us. And then the pink and green tourmaline, because of that color energy, really can change the properties of the stone. So green tourmaline is associated with the heart chakra. It's an excellent compassion stone, but believe it or not, it's actually known as a protective crystal as well. It has the quality to disintegrate outside energy or influence that's kind of coming into your energy field. So it keeps you safe by dissolving energy that's not for your highest good. And then pink tourmaline really activates the higher heart chakra and is generally associated with compassion and feelings of empathy and oneness and connection to kind of all other beings on this earth.
I love that. Yeah. On my body, I usually have bracelets that are either like shungite is a favorite one of mine for protection, black tourmaline, of course, and then, it kind of varies with amethyst or ruby or whatnot.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that is so wonderful about crystal therapy is that you can really explore and customize what kind of energy you need based on the stones that you choose. And this really should be a personal thing. Like, in my classes that I teach, I always encourage my students to really use their intuition and just be a little bit open-minded and think about which stones are kind of calling your attention. This could be a subconscious thing that you just feel kind of attracted to one crystal over another for that particular day. And chances are, if you go home at the end of the day and you read a little bit about what some of the properties that are known or associated with that stone, you can generally find a few things that you probably needed throughout the day. So if you are feeling really called to pick up that ruby bracelet, then listen to that kind of, whether you want to call it inner guidance or subconscious direction, or if you want to just chalk it up to coincidence, that's okay by me. But pick up that stone, put it on, wear it through the day, and then when you get home, read just a little bit about those properties and see if anything kind of resonates or stands out as being significant for the day. Perhaps you find that you're really drawn to a protective stone and you find yourself in the midst of, a really negative environment at work or something like that. There's usually a reason that we're kind of drawn to these particular crystals.
Yeah, and I have a friend who isn't as much into the woo as me, so I love taking her just into a crystal store and saying, just pick out a stone that you like. For anyone listening, you don't have to know what you're doing, But if you just walk into a store, browse around, and pick up a stone you like, and then look up the properties, then you can tell kind of what your subconscious or your body is desiring, or what energies you're desiring in your life right then. And it's amazing how that turns out.
Exactly. And, I actually recommend that kind of a practice more than thinking about what you think you need. Because sometimes what you think you need and what the universe knows you need are totally different. And so if you consciously think, well, I really need a stone for self-confidence, that might be true on a conscious level, but subconsciously there might be something that is so much more important than that. So maybe what you really need to focus on is clearing blocks to your personal success. Maybe it's not so much a confidence issue as, your ego mind kind of always getting in the way of your success, or something like that. So rather than looking at it from kind of a conscious perspective of what you think you need and looking up in a book, okay, I want to find a crystal that's good for confidence and rushing out to purchase that, which is actually what most people do. I think what you're suggesting is such a better practice. Just kind of be open to what you're attracted to and go with that, because chances are you're going to get actually a lot more benefit from working with the crystals that way.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I know on one particular trip that I did, I went in with the intention of, okay, I need crystals that are going to help with abundance. But I ended up being drawn to things like selenite and just these really light colored clear crystals that I think were more in tune with clearing energy and connecting with spirit. So
yeah. And isn't that funny how, even when you go in with that intention,
yeah,
your inner self just knows, like, no, there's something else going on here.
Yeah. So now you use crystals to facilitate healing in the body. Is that more your focus?
That's something that I was doing for many years, actually, for the past 9 or 10 years, until the end of last year. I actually let go of my crystal therapy practice because I got so busy with the school. But that was, the main focus of what I was doing. And it's now the main focus of what I teach others how to do. So it's about creating transformation by placing crystals on and around the physical body. And this is called a crystal layout. And this is how most crystal therapists use their stones, although there are actually lots of methods of using crystals. You can create a crystal grid, which is kind of placing crystals in a sacred geometric formation, and usually in a sacred space or on an altar or something like that. You can use crystals for distance healing. So if the person that you want to work with is not physically present, you can actually send the energy distantly, like what a lot of people do with Reiki. You can use your crystals for your own self-healing and transformation or personal protection. You can use crystals during meditation. That's actually one of my favorite ways to use my stones.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, so just there are lots of different ways to explore, and I think finding the one that really suits you is the best way to go, because then you're more likely to actually integrate your work with your stones into your day-to-day.
You mentioned crystal grids, and that's something that I've started doing this past year, is actually looking up geometric shapes or grid shapes that actually make the power of the crystal more amplified. What is the purpose of a crystal grid?
Yes, actually what you said is pretty right on. So it's really about taking all those individual parts of the grid, so all those individual crystals that make up the grid, and really this is just, you're placing your crystals in this geometric arrangement according to whichever kind of shape you're choosing and its inherent properties. And by placing the crystals in that arrangement, you have the power of the stones combined with the sacred geometry. And what the sacred geometry does is actually amplify the crystal's energy even more, as well as unify and connect those crystals into one kind of cohesive unit, so that the sum of the parts, the energy of the sum of the parts, is greater than just the individual pieces. So, for example, when I'm kind of guiding people through creating their own crystal grids, the very first step is to create an intention for yourself. So what is it that you're trying to do with your grid? So let's use your example of abundance. You are really called to do some abundance and manifesting work. A good shape for abundance is actually the infinity symbol. It looks like a little figure 8. You can use that shape for calling in infinite abundance, not just of wealth and prosperity, but abundance of anything that you need in your life. Or you can use the seed of life or flower of life shapes. These are actually very, very commonly used in crystal grids because they're all about calling in the energy that you need the most. They have the ability for kind of infinite manifestation in your life, whether that's a manifestation of health or of love or of prosperity or good luck. Whatever it is that you're trying to bring into your life, those shapes are good all-purpose shapes. But if you were looking for something more like a crystal grid for protection, you might want to use the energy of the shape of a square. A square is very stable and solid. It's connected with the earth element. It's known for kind of being a protective symbol for thousands of years, connects with the physical body, so it's good for physical health and protection, not only kind of spiritual or energetic protection. So after you create your intention or whatever it is that you would like to create your grid for, I recommend writing this down as like a little statement so that you actually are fully connected with what it is you're trying to manifest. The next step is to then choose the shape that's going to support that intention based on the shape's associated properties. And from there, you can choose your crystals, either intuitively or based on their properties and making sure that they connect back to your intention. And then you kind of build the shape out of the stones that you've chosen. So for example, if you were going to build a square, you would need at least 4 crystals to kind of make that shape, but you could add as many as you wanted. You know, you could actually have all the crystals touching to create a complete square, or you could just put some in the corner points. So there's a lot that you can really do in terms of being really creative and intuitive when it comes to building the grid. But those are the basic steps. Create your intention, then choose the right shape because it's that shape that connects with universal source energy. Sacred geometry is kind of like the language of the universe. So when you're creating a crystal grid and you're trying to manifest or call something into your life, it's about getting that message through loud and clear. And that's the part that the sacred geometry kind of lends to the grid.
Yeah. And I've found that a lot of people are also really interested in grids around relationships. So what types of shapes or stones would someone want to use for that?
You know, again, the flower of life and seed of life, always a good all-purpose shape to use because it really just is about calling in what you need the most. But you can get really creative and you can actually use symbols rather than sacred geometric shapes. So say if you were doing a crystal grid for love, you might actually want to create a heart shape out of your stones. That is a universal symbol for love that's kind of programmed into the mass consciousness of everyone on this world. When we see the shape of a heart, we know instantly what that means. And so there's a lot of power and energy kind of backed by those symbols. But another shape that would be really good, depending on what you're trying to do around love, would be a triangle. A triangle is a shape of transformation. So if you've been kind of stuck in a place where you haven't been connecting with the right partner, finding the right person to have a relationship with, maybe it's really time for transformation, a big change. So the triangle shape would be a good shape. Or perhaps you want to bring more balance to your relationship. If you're looking to create more balance, then an octagon is actually an excellent shape to use. So there are just so many opportunities for being creative and really customizing the energy of your crystal grid to what you need.
Okay, yeah, I really love that, especially like the heart shape. You know, that wouldn't have occurred to me to just, do a heart.
I know, it seems almost childlike, almost playful, but that's kind of one of the fun things about working with crystals is there are no rules, there are no limitations. You can just be very creative and allow yourself to explore the energy and see what works and what doesn't for you and make corrections as you go.
Okay, wonderful. Can you talk a little bit about some experiences of back to crystals on the body? Talk about some of your experiences working with clients or maybe some of your students who have had experiences in using crystals to facilitate healing in the body.
Yeah, so I've had some really profound experiences that it's one of those things, like if I were listening to this conversation right now and I heard me tell this story, I would think like, yeah, okay, you're probably just making that up to sound good. But I really have some profound experiences, and those are few and far between, I think, compared to the more everyday experiences. So I'm just going to give you an example of each. So let's start with everyday experiences that I think are, little minor miracles. I had a student who was one of my clients. She was a student at the university here in Madison, Wisconsin, where I live. And she was getting completely stressed out with school. And she was getting these horrible tension headaches. And I normally don't do a symptom-based approach to crystal therapy because instead of looking at, okay, the fact that she's having a headache and choosing crystals that are going to help reduce headache pain, I actually try and get more to the root cause of things. So that's what we do usually during a client check-in, just how you do at the doctor's office. So I said, first of all, are you going to see your doctor about these chronic headaches? Because that's important. And, I make sure that the client is getting the traditional kind of Western allopathic care that they need to get. And then the crystals are just there to support the person energetically through that transformation back into wholeness, because this is kind of an integrative approach to healing. Mm-hmm. And so once we're clear on that, the next step is to really dive into why these headaches are happening. So rather than just looking at the headache pain and trying to find a way to resolve that issue, I try to get to the root cause because crystals are working on an energetic level. So what we determined was that it was because she was carrying so much tension and stress from school and all of her commitments and responsibilities, and it was just getting really overwhelming. So what we determined is that rather than addressing just the headache pain in the session, which we did as a starting point, we also got to more of the root cause, which was helping to clear away some of that stress that had kind of accumulated in her aura or her energy field, and then also grounding her so that she had a healthy channel to release that stress periodically, because she was so much kind of in her mental space that she wasn't taking care of her physical body. And so we really worked on self-care and grounding and cleansing the energy of the energy field. And after about 3 visits, she was kind of at that tune-up point where she was feeling so much better. And now that she had a few practices and knew just to be conscious of how her body was feeling rather than pushing her physical to the max, she was in a much better place, and her headaches actually stopped for probably about 6 weeks until she kind of got out of her habits a little bit and then came back for a little tune-up.
Yeah.
And that's what I find is most common. People can usually make it 6 to 8 weeks where they're going to do really good, and then they should just come in and have a little tune-up as kind of a reminder or a refresher. And for her, that's all she needed, was just that reminder to be present in her physical body and make sure that she was taking care of herself. So that was just a small transformation that really comes more from her being empowered, but through the crystal energy, kind of helped bring her back to a place of balance. Now that's more, I think, what's common. Then I've had, like I said, these hugely powerful things happen in sessions. So one example is I had an older gentleman. The way that I do my sessions is I actually scan the body first, and scanning just means I kind of run my hands through the energy field and tune into the energy and see what I pick up on. I don't always know how to interpret what I'm feeling, but I communicate with my client to figure out if anything's going on. So for this particular gentleman, when I was doing my initial scan of his energy body, I noticed some really strange energy in his pelvic area. It was very hot. I could feel in my hands a great deal of heat and kind of like a pulsing electrical sensation. And needless to say, it wasn't a very pleasant sensation. And for me, I'm very tactile and kinesthetic, so I really feel the energy. Other healers may be more clairaudient or clairvoyant to be able to see or hear things about what's happening, but I just feel it all. And so all I could do was explain to him what I was feeling and say, are you having any issues? Does this sound like anything that you're aware of? And he said, no, I can't think of, what would be going on in that area. So I just chalked it up to, okay, I'm just picking up on it. It's not really resonating for him, and I don't know how to interpret it. So we just went through the rest of the session. I did some general chakra balancing and healing, and then at the end of the session, I placed a few crystals to bring some balance and cool down the heat in that area. Well, I didn't see him for probably 5 to 6 weeks after that, and he came in, and we had an appointment booked for 2 weeks after, and he called and canceled, but he didn't really say why, and I said, that's okay. So after about 6 weeks, he gave me a call and booked a session, and he came in and he said, I just want to tell you, 2 days after my initial session with you, I started experiencing a great deal of pain in that kind of pelvic region. He said, and it reminded me that I had actually had some pain there a few weeks prior, but because it hadn't been recent, I didn't think it was relevant. And then it kind of came back again. So I went to the doctor and I found out that I actually had a hernia.
Oh, wow.
And he had to cancel his session because he actually had to go in for surgery and have the hernia repaired because it had gotten so bad. He said, I guess I've just been fighting that pain for so long. It's been on and off. I just didn't really think it was anything kind of major. It hurt, but it wasn't like end of the world kind of thing. But he said, I just wouldn't have given it a second thought until you brought it up in the session. And then when I felt it a few days later, it made me be more conscious of my body. And that was something for me that was really interesting, because here's someone who had been experiencing something and was kind of not putting a lot of credence into it until it was brought up in an energetic way. And so again, that's just like that whole body approach to healing. And for him, it was so important because he said, I was at the verge of, if I had let it go much longer, the doctor said it could have gotten a lot worse. He said, I was so grateful to go in and have this very minor surgery done rather than have it tear further and have major problems down the road. So for me, that was just a good confirmation that being open to your intuition and just exploring what is happening and communicating that with the client can be really powerful and transformative for their healing.
Yeah, and definitely getting that other perspective energetically, like you said, it can be so helpful.
Yes, and a lot of people just need that, or they need to talk it out and think it through. And sometimes, it might be something that they're not even really consciously aware of too much until it's brought to their attention. And then they think, what? Yeah, there is something going on with that. And sometimes it's physical. Sometimes it's more of an emotional issue. It's really interesting how those things kind of bubble to the surface during a session when you're providing the space for that for your client, when you're providing that personal empowerment so that they can transform and do their own healing work with you facilitating.
Yeah, now I've also had a lot of clients who struggle or are challenged with anxiety. So are there any stones or maybe crystal grids that you would recommend that someone could try at home around anxiety?
Kim, this is actually one of my personal struggles, and this isn't something that I usually speak very openly about, but I never used to think that anxiety or panic attacks were really like a real thing. I'm just going to be blunt. Mm-hmm. I always remember thinking stuff like, just suck it up, you're fine. Like, it's not that big of a deal. Everyone gets a little nervous sometimes, until I had my first panic attack in my life. And then I thought, oh my gosh, how cold and uncompassionate I've been to not realize how debilitating this is for people.
Yeah.
And for me, it started to happen more and more frequently after I was diagnosed with a heart condition. I would have some issues with my heart, and it was scary, and it would trigger a major anxiety problem. And it was something that I really struggled with on and off for a few years. I really tried everything I could, changed my sleep, changed my diet, went to counseling, was doing all the right things through traditional medicine. But it was really through the use of crystals and meditation that I was able to fully get my anxiety under control. And I rarely have an issue with it at all now. And I really attribute that to my work with crystals. So this is kind of near and dear to my heart. So what worked for me and what I've seen work with a lot of my clients is having something that you can wear, having a piece of jewelry or a pocket stone or a crystal that you keep in your purse or your pocket that never, ever leaves your side. Because when you're dealing with anxiety, you're never quite sure when it's going to become an issue. Mm-hmm. You can be out shopping in the middle of the grocery store, having a wonderful, fantastic day, and all of a sudden something triggers that anxiety. You can never be sure where it's going to come from. For me to have a touchstone, so to speak, and something that when I was having my anxiety, I could look down at those crystal bracelets and focus on my breathing, focus on getting centered, and I would just breathe in that crystal energy. And the crystals that I was using at the time were aquamarine and lepidolite. So lepidolite is good for balancing the hemispheres of the brain and bringing you back into balance mentally. And then aquamarine is a naturally calming stone. It helps you kind of go with the flow. It brings just this very, very tranquil kind of energy into your field. So not only was I wearing those bracelets to have the energy work more preventatively, but then when I was having an issue, they were a constant reminder that I didn't need to get caught up in the anxiety, that I could take control of that moment and work through it, which for me was really, again, that conscious reminder that I needed. And I think that's one of the best things about crystals. And then I felt really supported by the energy of those stones as I was going through that, so that I could kind of get to the other side of it. I could get calm, I could get centered, and find that place of balance within myself again. So those are two that I highly recommend. You know, another thing that I really like doing if I'm more like at home and I'm in a comfortable space, if I'm having a problem with anxiety or if I'm starting to feel stressed out and I know that maybe it's time to do some preventative work, is to actually take a piece of petrified wood and place it on the ground and make yourself kind of comfortable on your sofa or in a cozy chair and just gently rest your feet, the soles of your feet, on that petrified wood stone. And this can be two small little tumbled stones, or what I really like to use is I have a big slice or slab of petrified wood, and I'll just gently set my feet on top of that. And the reason that petrified wood works so good is because it is so grounding. So energetically, anxiety is usually kind of the outward physical symptom of an excess of energy in the body that needs to be released. And I find the easiest way to do this is to actually ground it out through the soles of the feet. And the petrified wood helps do that by drawing that excess energy out of the body. So that's just something really simple that anyone can do. And you can combine the petrified wood, the aquamarine, and the lepidolite into a layout, if that's something you're interested in, by placing the petrified wood below the feet, lying down, making yourself comfortable, holding the aquamarine in your hands, either in your receiving hand, which is your non-dominant hand, so the hand that you don't write with, so that you're drawing that calming energy in, and then placing the lepidolite either on either side of your head, if you have two pieces, or just above the head to help balance the hemispheres of the brain and bring more mental balance back into your field. So you can kind of use these crystals as a touchstone, do the little exercise where you place your feet on top of the petrified wood, or do a crystal layout. It's really up to you and your circumstance and situation and what's going on. If you're home and you're comfortable and you have your crystals, or if you're out and about and you need that touchstone.
Yeah. And you made a really good point about just having that excess energy, because what I've found is that a lot of people, they are absorbing energy for whatever reason. It's either in their human design or whatnot, and they don't realize that, and they often get overwhelmed in crowds because they're just sucking up everybody else's stuff.
Yeah.
So I've also recommended protection stones. Have you found protection stones to help at all with anxiety, or is that just a separate thing?
No, I definitely do think that they help, especially if the anxiety is coming from, like what you said, people absorbing that outside energy. And so for a lot of empaths and people who are sensitive to those energies, either from other people or just energies that are within an environment itself, the protective crystals work to really shield the body. So if you wanted to use some stones for that, definitely those main protective crystals we talked about earlier today, or labradorite, because it's very shielding to the aura. So if you're used to kind of soaking up all those energies, it actually acts as kind of a reflective mirror, so that those energies, as they're coming into your field, they just get reflected back out into the space rather than you absorbing them. So labradorite is excellent for that. Or that green tourmaline, we talked about how it disintegrates and dissolves energy. That's an excellent one. And peridot works very much the same way.
Yeah. And I love that process about the petrified wood, because that's such an easy way for them to do it in the home rather than go out. Like another way to drain is to go out and walk in your bare feet in the grass, but that's not always convenient. So I really love that petrified wood process.
Yeah, and if you're in the middle of like a full-blown panic attack, I mean, that's something I used to do was go for a walk because it would often help me, but it really depends on where you are. Like if I'm out at my home in the country and I go for a walk, it is very relaxing. If I'm downtown in the busy city where I work and I go out for a walk,
Yeah.
it can be a little bit more overwhelming. So it just depends on your circumstance.
Yeah. Okay, so now what would you say to skeptics or maybe more left brain types who don't believe rocks carry special energy or that they can facilitate any sort of shifts or healing in a person?
The first thing I'd say is I completely understand where you're coming from. I'm a naturally skeptical person myself, believe it or not, even though I might seem a little bit into the woo-woo stuff to a lot of you. I have to experience something for myself. So that's what I would encourage you to do if you are skeptical is, do what Kim mentioned before. Go into your local rock shop and take a look around and see if there's anything that just seems interesting. And I think keeping that viewpoint of, isn't that interesting is really important because you're not having to completely come over to the new age side of things. You don't have to completely surrender to these beliefs, but you can just have an open mind enough to say, isn't that interesting that I chose a crystal that's good for relationships when that's something that I'm struggling with right now? Or, isn't that interesting that this crystal really did make me feel a little bit calmer after holding it for a few minutes? And just keeping that open mind enough to acknowledge when you do feel even the slightest shift or change, because it's important to remember crystals work on a very subtle level. So this isn't big life shifts that happen immediately. This is kind of slow, gradual change that happens over time when you start opening up to this energy. So yeah, I think allow yourself to be open-minded, allow yourself to explore, and give yourself permission to say, isn't that interesting?
I love that advice. Yeah. And that's been my advice from the beginning for this whole entire podcast is, just try it. If it doesn't work for you, it doesn't. But if it does.
Exactly. And, I have some people say, well, how do I know if it's the crystal or if it's just the placebo effect? If it is the placebo effect, if a crystal can cause such a powerful change in your thinking that it causes a physical or emotional response in your body, then is that really the placebo effect at all? Isn't that the crystal just amplifying the power of human thought? And isn't the power of human thought pretty darn amazing?
Yeah, the brain is the most powerful healing resource we have. So, yeah. All right. Well, Ashley, thank you so much. This has been so informative and I learned a lot. And I just wanted to, before I let you go, shift the interview a bit and ask you some fun questions to let people get to know a different side of you.
Oh, that sounds great. I'd love that.
Okay, so the first question is, who was your favorite music group growing up? Like, did you obsess over any singer or have posters hanging on your wall?
This is embarrassing because I'm only 30, but probably my favorite music group is Led Zeppelin.
Oh, wow.
I can remember just totally rocking out to Led Zeppelin in the back of my dad's junky car growing up, and it's something that, I still really enjoy today. So,
oh, that's hilarious.
Led Zeppelin and the Beatles. I love a lot of classic rock.
Wow, nice. Yeah. All right. Well, secondly, what was the worst thing you got in trouble for with your parents?
Oh my goodness. Okay. Another embarrassing story. I can't believe I'm going to tell you this. So when I was in first grade, I would walk home from school every day, and I lived on the same street as these two boys in my grade. So we'd walk home from school together every single day. And once there was a pair of Mickey Mouse underwear in the middle of the road, and it had been raining and they were all wet and gross, and the boys triple dog dared me to pick it up with a stick and put it in one of those big blue post office boxes. And I did it, and this woman came out of her house and said, I saw you do that, and I know your mother. I am going to call her. And I was so terrified. I ran all the way home crying, and I called my mom at work, and I told her what I had done. And apparently, I didn't know because she kept putting me on hold, she was just in a fit of laughter because I was sobbing, but she wanted to teach me a lesson. So she got back on the phone and said, okay, did you know that tampering with the mailbox is a federal offense?
Oh.
And the poor mailman has to fish those Mickey Mouse underwear out of there, and, you could go to jail. And so the Postmaster General said, if you write a letter of apology to that mailman, and take it to him, then they won't press charges and you won't go to jail. And I said, okay. And she said, I want you to have this letter done by the time I get home from work. And I said, okay. And my mother still has that letter in her desk drawer at work to this day.
Oh, that's so funny.
There's an embarrassing story.
Wow.
For you,
and you were how old at the time?
I was probably about 7.
Oh,
7
wow. So you can barely write as it is.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. All right. And then lastly, what is the number one thing on your bucket list?
You know, I really want to go visit Chiang Mai, Thailand. I don't know what it is about it, but for many years I've just been kind of drawn to that particular place, and I'd really like to go there and go on like a 4-week yoga retreat and just kind of be in that energy. I'm not sure why, but yeah, that's majorly on my list right now.
Yeah, that sounds great. All right. Okay, well, Ashley, thank you so much for being on the show. And what's the best way to contact you for training or to find your training resources?
You know, the very best way to get a hold of me is to go to loveandlighthealingschool.com. There is a contact box on there, and there's also some really great free crystal healing resources. You can download some free ebooks or watch some of my videos and just kind of hang out and learn a little bit more about crystals.
Well, perfect. All right. Well, thank you again so much, and I wish you the best.
Oh, thank you, Kim. It's totally my pleasure. You are a wonderful interviewer.
For this week's WooWoo News Corner, I found that the magic of crystals is very hotly debated. I enjoyed one particular article by Science-Based Life that said crystals only work because of the power of suggestion. I also found the research of Dr. Marcel Vogel interesting, mostly because Dr. Vogel was a research scientist for IBM for 27 years. So he appealed to my inner IT nerd, or maybe not so inner. Anyhow, he conducted a lot of experiments around water and crystals and even developed a radionics instrument to measure energetic fields. Dr. Vogel spent 17 years studying the properties of quartz and determined that crystals, or at least quartz, can store energy. He also discovered that grinding quartz into different shapes created different properties, such as storing energy or amplifying or transferring energy. This is why crystals of different shapes hold different intentional energy. Dr. Vogel emphasized that crystals had to be faceted with geometrical precision, otherwise the energy would not be properly harnessed. He also had a lot to say about the power of thought. Quote, "When we speak of the power of thought, it is true. Thought moves through a field we call etheric space. The energy of the mind is focused in space and has the capacity to expand the lattice system in which it is projected, released with intention. In this way, you can focus your intention on the crystal, you can then extract the data, amplify the pulse, or release it as a projected burst of etheric plasma. It is the operator's belief in him or herself, the knowledge and assurance of what they are doing that brings about this form of therapy. The subject must accept responsibility for their life and assume the pattern of living that this form of treatment brings about." Unquote. I think one thing that everyone has agreed upon is don't underestimate the power of suggestion. My question to you, how can the power of your beliefs support you? Thank you for listening to WooWoo for the Skeptic. I would love to hear from you if you have ideas for a show or want to give feedback on an episode. And if you enjoyed this episode or any other episode, subscribe to the podcast so that you never miss a show. And now for your moment of woo. This quote comes from Henry David Thoreau. "As a single footstep will not make a path on the earth, so a single thought will not make a pathway in the mind. To make a deep physical path, we walk again and again. To make a deep mental path, we must think over and over the kind of thoughts we wish to dominate our lives." Have a great week, everyone.